Have you ever wondered why the Middle East is such a complex and often turbulent region? The headlines are full of conflict, political strife, and deep-seated tensions. But to truly understand what's happening today, we need to look back, way back, almost 1,000 years, to a series of religious wars that carved scars so deep they've never fully healed. I'm talking about the Crusades. Now, you might think of the Crusades as ancient history, a dusty chapter in a textbook filled with knights in shining armor and epic battles. And you're not wrong, but that's only part of the story. The legacy of these holy wars is not just in crumbling castles and old manuscripts. It's alive and kicking in the politics, culture, and social fabric of the modern Middle East. Today, we're going to unpack how a medieval conflict continues to echo through the centuries, shaping the world we live in right now. Let's set the stage. It's the late 11th century. The Byzantine Empire, the eastern remnant of the Roman Empire, is feeling the pressure from advancing Seljuk Turks. The emperor in Constantinople sends a desperate plea for help to the Pope in Rome. Pope Urban II sees an opportunity not just to help a fellow Christian state, but to unite a fractured Europe under his own spiritual authority and reclaim the Holy Land, especially Jerusalem, from Muslim rule. In 1095, at the Council of Clermont, the Pope delivered a fiery sermon calling on Christian knights and commoners alike to take up the cross and march east. The response was overwhelming. This wasn't just a military campaign. For many, it was an armed pilgrimage, a chance to win spiritual salvation. The First Crusade was a brutal, chaotic, but ultimately successful campaign for the Europeans. They captured Jerusalem in 1099 and established several Crusader states along the eastern Mediterranean coast. This initial success, however, came at a horrific cost. The Crusaders' march was marked by massacres of Jewish communities in Europe and brutal slaughter of Muslim and Jewish inhabitants in the cities they conquered. For the people of the Middle East, this was their first major encounter with a large-scale, aggressive European military force. They called the invaders Frange, or Franks, a term that became synonymous with foreign, hostile invaders. This created a powerful us versus them narrative right from the very beginning. Imagine living in a city like Jerusalem or Antioch for centuries, where different faiths, while not always living in perfect harmony, had found a way to coexist. Then, suddenly, an army from a distant land arrives, claiming a divine mandate to conquer your home. This was a profound shock to the system. It shattered existing power structures and introduced a new, violent dimension to Christian-Muslim relations in the region. Over the next 200 years, a series of further crusades were launched, with varying degrees of success. We have the famous Third Crusade, pitting Richard the Lionheart against the legendary Muslim leader Saladin. Saladin, who had united various Muslim factions, recaptured Jerusalem in 1187. His victory was a massive morale boost for the Muslim world, and he became a symbol of chivalry, resistance, and Islamic unity, a figure still revered across the Middle East today. In fact, the memory of Saladin is a powerful political tool. Think about it. When modern Arab leaders want to project an image of strength and pan-Arab or pan-Islamic unity against foreign influence, who do they often compare themselves to? Saladin. Saddam Hussein famously portrayed himself as a modern-day Saladin during the Gulf War. This isn't just a random historical reference. It has a direct appeal to a deep cultural memory of a hero who successfully pushed back against Western invaders. As the Crusades fizzled out by the end of the 13th century, the direct political control of the Europeans was gone, but the memory was not. The experience of the Crusades left a lasting sense of grievance and a deep-seated suspicion of Western intentions. For centuries, the Frange were seen as aggressive, untrustworthy, and driven by a desire to conquer and dominate. Fast forward to the 19th and 20th centuries, the age of European colonialism. When powers like Britain and France began carving up the Ottoman Empire after World War I, creating the borders of many modern Middle Eastern states like Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, how do you think this was perceived by the local populations? It was seen as a new crusade. The colonial powers weren't brandishing crosses and swords, but they were imposing their political will, exploiting resources, and drawing lines on a map that ignored ancient ethnic and sectarian divisions. For many Arabs and Muslims, this was history repeating itself. The colonialists were simply the new French, the new crusaders arriving to dominate and divide. This narrative of a new crusade became a powerful rallying cry for nationalist and anti-colonial movements across the region. It wasn't just about political independence. It was about cultural and religious survival against a perceived threat from the West. This crusader framing is incredibly persistent. When the United States invaded Iraq in 2003, leaders of extremist groups like Al-Qaeda immediately labeled it a modern crusade. Osama bin Laden frequently used the term crusaders to describe American and Western forces. He wasn't just using inflammatory language. He was tapping into that same thousand-year-old well of historical grievance. He was deliberately framing a modern geopolitical conflict in the context of a medieval holy war to galvanize support and legitimize his cause. And for a segment of the population that felt disenfranchised and oppressed by Western foreign policy, this message resonated powerfully. Even beyond extremist rhetoric, the language of the Crusades permeates political discourse. When Western leaders use phrases like crusade against terror, even if meant metaphorically, it can be incredibly damaging. In the West, crusade can mean a vigorous campaign for a good cause. But in the Middle East, the word has only one meaning: a history of violent religious invasion. This linguistic and historical disconnect creates a massive gulf in understanding and fuels mistrust. The Crusades also had a profound impact on the internal dynamics of the Middle East. The external threat from the Crusaders forced different Muslim groups to unify, as we saw with Saladin. This created a precedent for pan-Islamic or pan-Arab unity in the face of a common enemy. The idea that the Muslim world, or the Arab world, must unite to defend itself against foreign aggression is a theme that runs straight from the 12th century to the 21st. Furthermore, the conflict exacerbated sectarian tensions. While the main conflict was between Christians and Muslims, the Crusades also impacted the relationships between different Christian and Muslim sects. Eastern Christians, who had lived in the region for centuries, were often caught in the middle. Sometimes they collaborated with the Crusaders, and sometimes they were victims of their violence, just like their Muslim and Jewish neighbors. This complicated their position, and in the long run, the Crusader period contributed to the decline and marginalization of some of these ancient Christian communities. So, when we look at the Middle East today, we see these echoes everywhere. The drawing of post-World War I borders by colonial powers is viewed through the lens of a crusader-like division of spoils. Western military interventions are framed as new crusades. Political leaders evoke the memory of Saladin to rally support. The very term West can carry a historical weight that is tied to the memory of the French. It's not that every person in the Middle East wakes up thinking about Richard the Lionheart. But the Crusades created a foundational story, a collective memory of trauma and resistance that has been passed down and reinterpreted through generations. It has become a part of the political DNA of the region. This history is used by politicians, taught in schools, and referenced in popular culture. It provides a simple, powerful explanation for complex problems. The West is the aggressor, and the region is the victim. Understanding this historical context is crucial. It helps us see that the mistrust of Western motives isn't just about recent foreign policy decisions like the Iraq War or support for certain regimes. It's rooted in a much deeper, older narrative. It helps explain why symbols and language matter so much in international diplomacy. The legacy of the Crusades is a cautionary tale. It shows how historical events, even those a millennium old, can cast incredibly long shadows. They create narratives that shape identity, fuel conflict, and build walls of mistrust that are incredibly difficult to tear down. To build bridges and foster real understanding between the West and the Middle East, we have to first acknowledge the weight of this shared, and often painful, history. It's not about assigning blame for events that happened 1,000 years ago. It's about understanding how the memory of those events continues to shape the present and, if we're not careful, the future. Thank you for watching. If you found this exploration of history's long reach interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the events that shaped our world. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time.